In the shadowed corridors of Windsor Castle, where whispers carry more weight than crowns, and secrets can topple kingdoms, one man's loyalty would be tested beyond measure. Captain James Morrison had spent 12 years protecting the royal family, his eyes trained to see threats from every corner, his ears attuned to danger in every sound. But nothing could have prepared him for what he would overhear on that rain-soaked Tuesday evening in November, a conversation between Princess Charlotte and her grandmother that would reveal a truth so shocking it would make him question everything he thought he knew about the family he'd sworn to protect. What Princess Charlotte knew about Queen Camilla's son wasn't just palace gossip. It was a secret that reached back decades, involving hidden identities, forgotten promises, and a love story that the royal family had buried so deep they thought it would never surface. But secrets have a way of finding the light, especially when an 8-year-old princess decides she's tired of keeping quiet about something that could change the very foundation of the monarchy itself. This is the story of how one guard's accidental discovery set in motion events that would rock the British royal family to its core, and how sometimes the most innocent voices carry the most dangerous truths. The grandfather clock in the East Wing corridor chimed 11 times as Captain James Morrison made his final security rounds of Windsor Castle. The November rain drummed against the ancient windows, creating a rhythmic backdrop to his measured footsteps on the polished marble floors. In his 12 years of service to the royal family, James had learned to move like a shadow through these halls. His presence felt but never intrusive. Tonight felt different somehow. The usual bustling energy of the castle had settled into an unusual quiet, broken only by the storm outside and the occasional creak of the old building settling. Most of the royal family had retired for the evening, but James had noticed lights still burning in the Queen Consort's private study and Princess Charlotte's bedroom wing. As he approached the library corridor, James heard voices drifting from the partially open door of the small reading room. He slowed his pace, not out of curiosity, but from professional habit. Any unexpected conversation at this hour warranted attention, particularly when it involved members of the royal family. Princess Charlotte's young voice carried clearly through the gap in the door, her tone unusually serious for an 8-year-old. James recognized the cadence immediately, having protected the young princess since her birth. But tonight, something in her voice made him pause. "Granny Camilla, why don't we ever talk about your other son?" Charlotte asked, her words cutting through the quiet like a knife. James felt his breath catch in his throat. He knew he should continue his rounds, but something about the gravity in the little girl's voice rooted him to the spot. Queen Camilla's response came after a long pause, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean, darling? You know Tom and Laura quite well." "No," Charlotte persisted, with the determined clarity that only children possess. "The other one. The one in the photographs you keep in the locked drawer. The one who looks just like Prince William but with different eyes." The silence that followed was deafening. James could hear his own heartbeat in the stillness, and he realized he was holding his breath. In all his years of service, he had never heard mention of another child connected to Queen Camilla, beyond her well-known son, Tom Parker Bowles, and daughter, Laura Lopez. When Camilla finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that James had never heard before, not even during the most challenging moments of her public life. "Charlotte, sweetheart, where did you see these photographs? I was looking for crayons in your desk last week when you were talking to Papa. The drawer wasn't locked properly." Charlotte's voice remained innocent, unaware of the earthquake her words were creating. "He has kind eyes like yours, but they're blue like Uncle Harry's used to be. And he's wearing a school uniform in one picture. Rugby, I think. Why don't we ever see him?" James knew he was witnessing something that could change everything he understood about the royal family. His training told him to leave, to pretend he had heard nothing, but his feet remained frozen to the ornate carpet. Camilla's voice, when it came, was thick with emotion. "His name is Marcus, Charlotte, and he's a very special secret that we've kept safe for a very long time." "But why is he a secret?" Charlotte pressed on, with the relentless logic of childhood. "Secrets are usually for bad things." He didn't look bad in the pictures. He looked nice. He was smiling at a dog. There was movement in the room, and James heard the soft sound of Camilla settling into what he knew to be the large armchair by the fireplace. When she spoke again, her voice carried the tone of someone making a momentous decision. "Sometimes, Charlotte, we keep secrets not because something is bad, but because something is too precious to share with the world. Marcus is my son, but he's not part of our public family. He lives a normal life, away from cameras and crowds and all the things that make your life so different from other children's." James felt his professional composure cracking. In 12 years of protecting royal secrets, He had never stumbled upon anything of this magnitude. The existence of an unknown son of the Queen Consort was the kind of revelation that could reshape public understanding of the monarchy. "Does Papa know about him?" Charlotte asked, referring to her father, Prince William, with the casual directness that had always charmed everyone around her. "Your papa knows," Camilla confirmed quietly. "So does your grandfather, King Charles. They've known for many years. We all agreed it was best to keep Marcus safe by keeping him private." "But that seems lonely for him," Charlotte observed with the heartbreaking wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Doesn't he want to know us? I would want to know my family." James heard Camilla's sharp intake of breath, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with tears. "He does know about all of you, darling. I see him regularly. We talk, we share stories, and yes, he knows he has a little stepniece who loves horses and mathematics and asks very thoughtful questions. He knows about me?" The delight in Charlotte's voice was unmistakable. "He's very proud of you," Camilla said softly, "and someday, when you're older, perhaps you'll meet him properly. But for now, this needs to remain our special secret, just between us." James realized he was witnessing one of the most private moments imaginable between a grandmother and granddaughter, but more than that, he was learning about a hidden branch of the royal family tree that could have massive implications if it ever became public knowledge. "I'm good at keeping secrets," Charlotte assured her step-grandmother solemnly. "I never told anyone that Mama cried when she read the mean newspaper stories about her dress. And I never told anyone that you and Grandpa Charles practice dancing when you think no one is watching." Despite the gravity of the situation, James heard Camilla's soft laughter. "You're very observant, aren't you, little one? Mama says it's important to notice things, especially about people we love. She says families take care of each other's feelings." Charlotte paused, and James could picture her serious expression as she processed something. "Is that why Marcus is secret? To take care of his feelings?" "Partly, yes," Camilla admitted. "The world can be very unkind to people connected to our family, Charlotte. You're learning that already, aren't you? The photographers, the stories in newspapers, the way people watch everything you do. Marcus gets to live without all of that. He gets to be just Marcus, not Queen Camilla's son or the king's stepson. But he misses out on Christmas morning with everyone, and birthday parties, and riding lessons with me and George and Louise," Charlotte pointed out with devastating logic. The pain in Camilla's voice was evident when she responded. "Yes, darling, he does miss out on those things. It's the price we pay to keep him safe and free." James heard movement again, and Charlotte's voice came from closer to where he stood. "Granny Camilla, can I tell you something else?" "Of course, sweetheart. I think secrets are heavy. I think they make people sad, even when they're good secrets. You always look a little sad when you look at that locked drawer." The wisdom in those words hit James like a physical blow. Here was an 8-year-old girl articulating something that trained observers had missed. He thought about all the times he had seen Queen Camilla pause at her desk, her hand hovering over that particular drawer, a distant look in her eyes that he had attributed to fatigue or stress. "You're very wise for such a little girl," Camilla said, and James could hear the tears in her voice now. "Yes, secrets can be heavy, even necessary ones." "Maybe someday the secret won't be necessary anymore," Charlotte suggested hopefully. "Maybe someday Marcus can come to Christmas and meet my pony and learn to play chess with me." "Maybe someday," Camilla agreed. But there was something in her tone that suggested she didn't truly believe it would ever be possible. James heard footsteps approaching the door and quickly continued his patrol, his mind racing with everything he had just learned. As he walked away, he could hear Camilla helping Charlotte gather her books, their conversation shifting to lighter topics about school and upcoming holidays. But the weight of what he had discovered pressed down on him like a physical burden. Somewhere in England, there was a young man named Marcus who was Queen Camilla's son, who knew about the royal family but lived apart from them, who had blue eyes and a kind smile and played rugby and loved dogs. A young man who was kept secret for his own protection, but who missed Christmas mornings and birthday parties and the chance to know his family. As James completed his rounds and prepared his security report for the night, he found himself facing an impossible situation. His job was to protect the royal family's secrets, but this secret felt different. It wasn't about protecting the monarchy from scandal. It was about a family divided by circumstance and necessity, about a young man living in shadow and a step-grandmother carrying the weight of an impossible choice. When he finally sat down to write his report, James found himself staring at the blank page for nearly an hour. How did one document the discovery of a secret that could change everything, while respecting the privacy of the family he had sworn to protect? How did one balance duty to the crown with the knowledge that somewhere a young man was living half a life because of decisions made long before he was old enough to have a voice in them? In the end, James wrote a standard security report noting nothing unusual in his evening rounds. But as he locked the document away, he knew that the secret of Marcus would weigh on him just as heavily as it clearly weighed on Queen Camilla. The rain continued to fall against the windows of Windsor Castle, washing the ancient stones clean, while inside, the secret that Princess Charlotte had stumbled upon continued to grow, like a seed planted in fertile ground, waiting for the right moment to break through into the light. James retired to his quarters that night, knowing that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a protector of the royal family, he had become the keeper of their most precious and painful secret. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the castle walls, a young man named Marcus lived his life unaware that his existence had been discovered by a security guard whose loyalty would soon be tested in ways he never imagined. 3 days had passed since James Morrison overheard the conversation that turned his world upside down, and the secret burned inside him like a live coal. Every time he saw Queen Camilla moving through the castle corridors, her composed public face masking the private pain he now understood, he felt the weight of knowledge he was never meant to possess. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the castle's east wing as James conducted his routine security briefing with his team. The familiar rhythm of planning patrol routes and checking communication systems felt surreal when his mind kept drifting to a young man named Marcus, who existed in the shadows of the royal family. "Sir?" Sergeant Patricia Wells, his second-in-command, was looking at him with concern. "You've been staring at that duty roster for 5 minutes without saying anything." James snapped back to attention, realizing he had been completely lost in thought. Patricia had worked with him for 6 years, and she knew his moods better than most people. Her sharp brown eyes missed nothing, which made her excellent at her job, but occasionally uncomfortable for James when he was trying to hide something. "Sorry, just thinking through some security adjustments," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "The Princess of Wales has requested additional privacy for the children's outdoor activities this week." It wasn't entirely a lie. Catherine had indeed made such a request, though that wasn't what had been occupying his thoughts. Patricia nodded, but James caught the slight furrow in her brow that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by his explanation. After dismissing his team, James found himself walking the same corridor where he had overheard Charlotte and Camilla's conversation. The reading room door was closed now, but he could still hear Charlotte's innocent voice asking why they never talked about Camilla's other son. The memory made his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. His secure radio crackled to life, interrupting his troubled thoughts. "Captain Morrison, your presence is requested in the King's private office immediately." James felt his blood run cold. Had someone discovered what he had overheard? He had been so careful to maintain his normal routine, to show no sign that anything had changed. But as he made his way to King Charles's office, each step felt heavier than the last. The King's private secretary, a thin man named Geoffrey Hartwell, whom James had always found intimidatingly efficient, gestured him toward the ornate door without his usual polite small talk. That alone was enough to set James's nerves on edge. King Charles was standing by the window when James entered, his hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the castle grounds. The morning light cast deep shadows across his face, making him look older than his years, and somehow more vulnerable than James had ever seen him. "Your Majesty," James said, coming to attention and waiting for permission to speak freely. "Captain Morrison," the king said without turning around. 12 years of exemplary service to my family. Discretion beyond reproach. Loyalty without question." He paused, and James felt his heart hammering against his ribs. "Tell me, in all those years have you ever encountered a situation that challenged your understanding of where your duty truly lies?" The question was so unexpected that James found himself genuinely considering it, rather than panicking about what the king might know. "I'm not sure I understand, sir." King Charles finally turned from the window, and James was struck by the weariness in his eyes. This wasn't the confident monarch he was used to seeing, but a father and grandfather grappling with something heavy. "Sometimes we make decisions that feel right in the moment but cast long shadows," the king said slowly. "Sometimes we choose what seems safest, only to realize years later that safety came at a price we didn't fully understand we were paying." James remained silent, sensing that this was a conversation that required him to listen rather than respond. "My wife carries a burden, Captain Morrison. We all do, but hers is particularly heavy because it involves a choice that affects someone who had no voice in the making of it." The king moved to his desk and sat down heavily. I'm going to tell you something that very few people know, and I'm trusting you to help me determine what the right thing to do might be." The words hit James like ice water. The king was about to confide in him voluntarily what he had accidentally discovered. The irony was almost overwhelming. 28 years ago, before Camilla and I were married, she had a relationship with a man named Michael Whitmore, a good man, an army officer who died in a training accident before he even knew Camilla was pregnant. King Charles spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of old grief. Camilla was devastated, alone, and facing a pregnancy that would have destroyed her reputation and her children's future if it became public knowledge.
James felt his mouth go dry.
The king was revealing the origins of the secret that Princess Charlotte had stumbled upon, filling in pieces that made the puzzle even more heartbreaking. We arranged for Marcus to be adopted by a lovely family, the Thorntons. They knew who his mother was, understood the circumstances, and agreed to raise him with love while maintaining absolute discretion. Camilla has been part of his life, but from a distance. He knows who she is, knows who we all are, but he lives as Marcus Thornton, not as a member of the royal family. "Sir," James began carefully, "may I ask why you're telling me this?" King Charles leaned back in his chair, studying James with an intensity that made him feel like his soul was being read. "Because yesterday my granddaughter asked me if it was fair that Marcus has to live like a secret. She used those exact words, Captain Morrison. An 8-year-old child has identified the moral complexity of a situation that we adults have been avoiding for nearly 3 decades. The weight of Princess Charlotte's innocent wisdom settled over the room like a heavy blanket. James could see now why the king looked so troubled, why this conversation was happening at all. "Charlotte's question has forced me to confront something I've been avoiding," the king continued. "Marcus is 27 years old now. He's a successful architect. He volunteers with veterans organizations, and by all accounts, he's a remarkable young man. But he's also my stepson, Charlotte and George, and Louis's step-uncle, and he's never been able to be part of their lives in any meaningful way." James found himself thinking about what Princess Charlotte had said about secrets being heavy, about how Queen Camilla looked sad when she gazed at her locked drawer. "What does Marcus want, sir?" "That's exactly the right question," King Charles said with something that might have been approval. "And the answer is that we've never really asked him, not directly. We've assumed that privacy was what he wanted, because privacy was what we decided he needed. But Charlotte's question has made me wonder if we've been protecting him from something he might actually want to be part of." The king stood and walked to a photograph on his desk, showing the extended royal family at last year's Christmas gathering. "Look at this picture, Captain Morrison. Count the people who are missing, not because they chose to be elsewhere, but because we decided they couldn't be there." James looked at the photograph with new eyes, seeing not just the assembled family, but the absence that Princess Charlotte's young heart had identified. Somewhere outside the frame was a young man who shared blood and history with these people, but couldn't share their holidays or their milestones. "I need someone I trust to make contact with Marcus," the king said suddenly. "Someone outside the usual family circle. Someone who can speak to him honestly about the situation and find out what he actually wants for his future. Someone who can explore whether there might be a way to bring him closer to the family without destroying the privacy that has protected him." James felt the enormity of what was being asked of him. "Sir, I'm not sure I'm qualified for such a delicate conversation." "You're exactly qualified," King Charles replied firmly. "You understand security, you understand discretion, and most importantly, you understand family loyalty. You've protected us for 12 years without ever betraying our trust. I can't think of anyone better suited to handle something this sensitive." The irony was overwhelming. James was being asked to make contact with the very person whose existence he had accidentally discovered just days ago. But more than that, he was being entrusted with a mission that could reunite a family or, if handled poorly, destroy the privacy that had protected Marcus for his entire adult life. "What would you want me to tell him?" James asked carefully. "The truth," the king said simply. That his stepniece asked a question that made us realize we might have been making decisions for him instead of with him. That we love him and miss him and want to know if there's a way to be more of a family without compromising his safety or privacy. James thought about Princess Charlotte's wise words about secrets being heavy, about families taking care of each other's feelings.
"And if he wants to remain private?"
"Then we respect that completely," King Charles assured him. "But if there's a chance that he wants something different, if there's a possibility that we could find a middle ground where he could be part of our lives more openly." The king's voice trailed off, but the hope in his eyes finished the sentence. I'll need his contact information, James said, making the decision that would change everything. And I'll need to understand exactly how much he knows about the family dynamics. He knows everything, the king said quietly. Camilla has been completely honest with him about our family, about the challenges we face, about why his privacy has been so important. He's never resented the arrangement as far as we know, but he's also never been asked if he might want something different. As James left the king's office with Marcus Thornton's contact information secured in an encrypted file, he felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire royal family's future. Princess Charlotte's innocent question had set in motion a chain of events that could reshape everything, and somehow he had become the key figure in determining how it would unfold. Walking through the castle corridors that he knew so well, James found himself seeing everything differently. These weren't just halls he patrolled for security. They were the paths that Marcus had never walked as a family member, the spaces where he existed only in hidden photographs and whispered conversations. That evening, as James sat in his apartment reviewing the information King Charles had provided about Marcus, he was struck by how normal the young man's life appeared to be. University degree from Cambridge, successful architectural firm, volunteer work with military charities, a small flat in Bath, hobbies that included photography and rock climbing. In many ways, Marcus Thornton had built exactly the kind of life that most people would envy. But James kept thinking about Princess Charlotte's observation that families take care of each other's feelings. And he wondered if anyone had ever really asked Marcus how he felt about being the secret that protected everyone else's peace of mind. The next morning, James made the phone call that would change everything. His hands were steady as he dialed, his voice calm as he introduced himself, but his heart was racing as he heard Marcus Thornton's voice for the first time. Mr. Dariel. Thornton? This is Captain James Morrison, head of security for the royal family. I'm calling at the request of King Charles. I believe there's something important we need to discuss. The coffee shop in Bath was busier than James had expected for a Tuesday afternoon, filled with university students and tourists chatting over steaming mugs. He had chosen this location carefully, somewhere public enough to feel safe, but private enough to allow for serious conversation. Now, waiting in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance, he felt more nervous than he had in years. Marcus Thornton walked through the door at exactly 3 o'clock, and James recognized him immediately, despite having only seen him in hidden photographs. The young man had his mother's elegant bearing and kind eyes, but there was something unmistakably familiar about his profile that spoke to his royal connections. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, scanning the room until his gaze settled on James. Captain Morrison? Marcus approached the table with a slight smile that didn't quite hide the wariness in his blue eyes. I have to admit, your phone call was the most unexpected thing that's happened to me in quite a while. James stood to shake hands, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. Mr. Thornton, thank you for agreeing to meet me. I know this situation is unusual. That's putting it mildly, Marcus said, settling into the chair across from James. In 27 years, I've never had direct contact with anyone from the security detail. When you said King Charles had asked you to reach out, I honestly wasn't sure if I should hang up or demand proof of identity. The waiter appeared at their table and both men ordered coffee, using the brief interruption to study each other. James found himself impressed by Marcus's composure. There was no sign of the bitterness or resentment that might have been expected from someone who had lived his entire life as a family secret. I should start by saying that everything we discussed today remains completely confidential, unless you explicitly give permission otherwise, James began once their coffee arrived. This conversation is happening because someone asked a question that made your mother and stepfather realize they might have been making assumptions about what you want from your relationship with the family. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his expression curious rather than defensive. Someone asked a question? That's interestingly vague. James smiled despite his nervousness. Your stepniece, Princess Charlotte. She asked her grandmother why they never talk about her other son. And when Camilla explained about you, Charlotte wanted to know if it was fair that you have to live like a secret.
The effect of those words on Marcus was immediate and profound.
His carefully maintained composure cracked, revealing a flash of emotion that he quickly tried to suppress. When he spoke, his voice was slightly hoarse. Charlotte knows about me. She discovered some photographs and asked direct questions, James explained gently. From what I understand, she's quite fond of you already, even though she's never met you properly. She told your mother that secrets seem heavy, and that families should take care of each other's feelings.
Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup.
When he looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. An 8-year-old said that? She did, and it made King Charles and your mother realize that they've never actually asked you what you want from your relationship with the family. They've been making decisions based on what they thought was best for your privacy and protection, but they're wondering if perhaps you might want something different. What I want, Marcus repeated slowly, as if the concept was foreign to him. That's not a question I've been asked very often when it comes to family matters. James leaned forward slightly, sensing that this was the crucial moment in their conversation. What do you want, Marcus? Not what's safest, not what's most convenient for everyone else, but what would make you happy. Marcus laughed, but it was a sound tinged with pain rather than humor. Do you know what it's like to love people you're not allowed to know? To watch their lives unfold in newspapers and magazines? To celebrate their achievements and worry about their struggles from a distance? He paused, running his hand through his hair. I've been proud of my mother every day since she married Charles. I've watched her handle the most vicious press coverage with grace and dignity. I've seen her become a beloved grandmother to William's children. And I've never been able to tell her any of that because our relationship has to exist in the shadows. The raw emotion in Marcus's voice hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't the detached acceptance he had expected, but a deep well of longing that had been carefully hidden for decades. I have pictures of Charlotte and George and Louis on my desk at work, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. My colleagues think they're just photos I've taken from newspapers because I'm interested in architecture and William sometimes visits building projects. They don't know that I'm looking at my stepniece and stepnephews, that I wonder what Charlotte's laugh sounds like, or whether George likes to build things like I did when I was his age. James felt the weight of the family's missed opportunities settling over the conversation like a heavy blanket. Have you ever told your mother any of this? How could I? Marcus asked. Every time we meet, she's so grateful that I'm not bitter, so relieved that I understand the necessity of secrecy, so worried about my well-being. How do I tell her that I dream about Christmas mornings with the family, about teaching Charlotte to ride a horse, about having a real conversation with Charles about his environmental work? How do I tell her that I've spent my entire adult life feeling like I'm mourning people who are still alive? The pain in Marcus's words was almost overwhelming. James thought about Princess Charlotte's innocent wisdom, about her observation that secrets are heavy, and realized she had identified something that the adults had been blind to for nearly 3 decades. Marcus, James said carefully, what if I told you that your mother carries that same pain? That King Charles sees your absence at every family gathering? That they love you and miss you but have been afraid to burden you with their own feelings because they thought they were protecting you? Marcus's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. You're saying they want something different too? I'm saying that Princess Charlotte's question has opened a door that's been closed for 27 years. They want to know if there's a way to be more of a family without compromising your safety or privacy. They want to explore whether there might be a middle ground that nobody's considered before. What kind of middle ground? Marcus asked, and James could hear the hope creeping into his voice, despite his obvious efforts to remain cautious. That's what we need to figure out together, James replied. Maybe it starts with private family gatherings, where you can get to know Charlotte and the boys properly. Maybe it involves gradual disclosure to close family friends who can be trusted. Maybe eventually it means finding a way to acknowledge your existence publicly without destroying the normal life you've built. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, and James could see him processing possibilities that he had probably never allowed himself to consider. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I've imagined it so many times. Walking into a family dinner, having Charlotte run up and hug me like a proper uncle, watching football with the boys, helping my mother with her charity work. He looked directly at James. But I've also imagined the media circus, the speculation about my father, the invasion of privacy that would follow. I've built a good life, Captain Morrison. I don't want to destroy it for a fantasy. What if it doesn't have to be a fantasy? James asked gently. What if we could find a way to give you real relationships with your family while protecting the life you've built? It would require careful planning, absolute discretion from everyone involved, and probably a gradual approach that lets you maintain control over how much of yourself you're willing to share. Marcus leaned back in his chair, looking suddenly younger than his 27 years. My mother really said she misses me? She did. And King Charles spoke about the burden of making decisions for you instead of with you. They want you to have agency in your own life, Marcus. They want to know what would make you happy. I want to know my family, Marcus said simply, the words carrying the weight of nearly 3 decades of longing. I want Charlotte to know she has an uncle who would be honored to be part of her life. I want to tell my mother that I'm proud of her, that I love her, that I don't resent the choices she made because I understand they came from love. I want to have a real conversation with Charles about something other than my well-being and security. James felt something loosening in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying since that night in the castle corridor. Then let's figure out how to make that happen. It won't be simple, Marcus warned. There are legal considerations, security implications, and the fact that my adoptive parents would need to be involved in any decisions. They've been wonderful, but this affects their privacy too. We'll take it one step at a time, James assured him. Nothing happens without your consent, nothing moves faster than you're comfortable with, and if at any point you want to stop the process, we stop. No questions asked, no pressure applied. Marcus nodded slowly, then smiled for the first time since their conversation began. It was a smile that transformed his entire face, revealing a warmth and humor that had been hidden behind years of careful guardedness. There is one thing I'd like to do right away, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a small wrapped package. I've bought Christmas and birthday presents for Charlotte for 3 years now. I never knew what to do with them, but I kept buying them anyway. If there's any way to get this to her without raising questions, I'd like her to know that a secret uncle thinks about her. James took the package, noting the careful wrapping and the small tag that simply read, "For Charlotte, with love from someone who's very proud of you." I think we can arrange that, James said softly, and I think she's going to be absolutely delighted to know that her uncle has been thinking about her too.
As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Marcus touched James's arm.
Captain Morrison, can I ask you something? How did you end up in the middle of this? It seems like an unusual assignment for head of security. James thought about that rainy night in the corridor, about Princess Charlotte's innocent questions and Queen Camilla's tears, about the moment when an overheard conversation changed everything he thought he knew about the family he protected. Sometimes, he said carefully, the most important part of protecting someone is helping them find their way back to the things they thought they had lost forever. Your family needs you, Marcus. They just needed someone to help them figure out how to tell you that. The private dining room at Highgrove House had never felt more significant to James Morrison than it did on this grey December evening. 2 weeks had passed since his meeting with Marcus in Bath. 2 weeks of careful planning, discreet arrangements, and conversations that would reshape the dynamics of the royal family forever. Queen Camilla stood by the window, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as she watched the driveway for any sign of approaching headlights. King Charles paced near the fireplace, his usual composed demeanor replaced by the nervous energy of a man about to reunite with someone he had loved from a distance for nearly 3 decades. Perhaps we should have chosen somewhere less formal, Camilla murmured, her voice betraying the anxiety she was trying so hard to conceal. What if he feels overwhelmed? What if this feels too much like a royal audience rather than a family dinner? My dear, Charles said gently, moving to her side and placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Marcus chose this location when James offered him several options. He said he wanted to see where we live when we're not being public figures. James stood discreetly near the door, ready to facilitate what he hoped would be a healing conversation while remaining available if security concerns arose. In his jacket pocket, he carried Marcus's Christmas gift for Princess Charlotte, along with 2 carefully written letters that Marcus had asked him to deliver regardless of how tonight's dinner proceeded. The sound of car tires on gravel broke the tension in the room. Through the window, they could see a modest blue sedan pulling into the circular drive, its headlights cutting through the December darkness. That's him, Camilla whispered, her voice catching slightly. Oh, Charles, what if we've waited too long? What if the distance between us can't be bridged? Then we'll build a new bridge, Charles replied firmly. Tonight is about possibilities, not regrets. James moved to the front door, arriving just as Marcus stepped out of his car. The young man looked composed but understandably nervous, dressed in a simple navy suit that somehow managed to look both respectful and approachable. He carried a small bouquet of flowers and what appeared to be a bottle of wine. Marcus? James greeted him quietly as they approached the entrance. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to meet my family for the first time, Marcus replied with a slight smile that didn't quite hide the tremor in his voice, which I suppose is exactly what's happening. They're just as nervous as you are, James assured him. Your mother has been standing by that window for 20 minutes, and King Charles has been adjusting the same photograph on the mantelpiece for the past 10. That earned James a genuine laugh from Marcus, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. It's strange to think of them being nervous about meeting me. In my mind, they've always been these impossibly composed public figures. Tonight, they're just a mother and stepfather who have missed 27 years of dinners with their son, James said simply. Ready? Marcus nodded, and James opened the door to lead him into the house that could have been his home if circumstances had been different. The moment Camilla saw Marcus walking into the dining room, the careful composure she had maintained for decades simply dissolved. She moved toward him with trembling steps, her eyes filling with tears as she took in the sight of the man her baby had become. "Marcus," she whispered, stopping just arm's length away, as if afraid that coming too close might break the spell and reveal this was all a dream. "Hello, Mum," Marcus said softly, and the simple word shattered the last of the barriers that had existed between them. Camilla reached out to touch his face with wonder, her thumb tracing the line of his cheek as tears streamed freely down her own. "You're so tall, you're so tall, you're so tall. You look so much like your father, but you have my mother's eyes. I've wanted to hug you properly for 20 years, Marcus confessed, his own voice thick with emotion. "Then what are we waiting for?" Camilla asked, and suddenly they were embracing with 27 years of stored affection, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously. King Charles approached slowly, his own eyes bright with tears as he watched his wife finally hold the son she had been forced to love from a distance. When Marcus and Camilla finally separated, Charles extended his hand formally before thinking better of it and pulling Marcus into an embrace that spoke volumes about the regret and love he had carried for so many years. "Welcome home, son," Charles said quietly, and the word son hung in the air like a benediction. James felt his own throat tighten watching the reunion unfold. He had facilitated many delicate situations during his years of service, but he had never been part of something that felt so fundamentally healing. As they settled around the dining table, James excused himself to check the security perimeter, but really to give the family privacy for their first real conversation in decades. Through the windows, he could see them talking animatedly, Camilla reaching across the table periodically to touch Marcus's hand, as if to reassure herself that he was really there. When James returned an hour later, the atmosphere had shifted from tearful reunion to genuine familial warmth. Marcus was showing Charles something on his phone, both men laughing at whatever they were discussing, while Camilla beamed at them both with an expression of pure contentment. "James," Charles called as he entered the room. "Marcus was just telling us about the community center he designed in Bristol. Apparently, it incorporates several of the sustainable building principles we've been advocating for years. It wasn't intentional initially," Marcus explained with a grin. "But I realized halfway through the project that I'd been unconsciously incorporating ideas I'd read about in articles about your environmental work. I suppose even from a distance you were influencing my professional development." The easy conversation continued throughout dinner, covering everything from Marcus's work to his travels to his thoughts on current events. James was struck by how naturally Marcus fit into the family dynamic, his humor and intelligence complementing his mother's warmth and Charles's thoughtfulness perfectly. It was as they moved to the sitting room for coffee that the conversation turned to the more complex question of what role Marcus might play in the family going forward. "I need you to understand," Marcus said seriously, "that I don't want anything from the family that I haven't earned. I don't want titles or money or special treatment. I just want the chance to be your son and Charlotte's uncle, and to stop feeling like a ghost in my own family's story." "What would that look like practically?" Charles asked. "We need to be realistic about the security implications and media considerations." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that since my conversation with James. What if we started with private family gatherings? Christmas morning, birthday parties, the kinds of occasions where the extended family already gathers. I could gradually become Charles's stepson in social circles without any dramatic public announcements." "The children would love that," Camilla said immediately. "Charlotte has been asking about you every day since our conversation. She's convinced that you must be lonely and needs a proper family hug." "I'd like to meet her properly," Marcus admitted. "And George and Louis. I want to be the kind of uncle who remembers birthdays and helps with school projects and teaches them terrible jokes." James cleared his throat gently. "Speaking of Charlotte, Marcus asked me to give her something." He produced the wrapped gift from his pocket. He's been buying presents for her for 3 years, not knowing how to deliver them. Camilla took the package with trembling hands, reading the tag aloud. "For Charlotte, with love from someone who's very proud of you." She looked up at Marcus with fresh tears in her eyes. "You've been thinking about her all this time?"
"I've been thinking about all of you," Marcus confessed.
"I have newspaper clippings about William's work, photos from George's first day at school, articles about Louis learning to walk. I've been living your lives secondhand for years." Charles stood abruptly and walked to his desk, returning with a thick photo album. "Then it's time you saw the first-hand version," he said, settling beside Marcus on the sofa. These are the family photos that don't make it into the official releases. The real moments, the private jokes, the times when we're just being ourselves. For the next 2 hours, they went through decades of family photographs, Marcus asking questions about moments he had missed, Camilla and Charles filling in the stories behind the images. James watched from his position by the door, marveling at how quickly the artificial barriers were dissolving. "There's something else we need to discuss," Charles said as they reached the end of the photo album. "Your adoptive parents. They've been your family for 27 years, and any changes we make need to respect their relationship with you." Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, I've already spoken to them about tonight. They've known about my longing to be closer to my birth family, and they're surprisingly supportive. Mum Janet said she's always wondered what it would be like to see me at a royal Christmas dinner, and Dad Peter joked that maybe now he'll finally get a good seat at Wimbledon." The easy humor broke some of the remaining tension, and James could see Charles and Camilla relaxing further as they realized they weren't displacing Marcus's adoptive family, but rather expanding his family circle. "What about your work colleagues, your friends?" Camilla asked. "How do we introduce this change without creating problems in your established life?" "Gradually," Marcus said, with the confidence of someone who had clearly thought this through carefully. "I'll start mentioning that I've reconnected with distant family members. Over time, people will meet you in social contexts. If anyone asks directly, I'll be honest about being your stepson, but I'll emphasize that I've chosen to live a private life separate from royal duties." Charles nodded approvingly. "That approach protects both your privacy and the integrity of the institution. And if the media eventually discovers the connection, it won't be a scandal because there's nothing scandalous about a family choosing to include a previously private member."
As the evening drew to a close, James found himself documenting not just a security detail, but a family's rebirth.
When Marcus prepared to leave, the goodbyes were warm but no longer desperate, carrying the comfort of people who knew they would see each other again soon. "Christmas morning," Camilla said firmly as she hugged her son goodbye. "You're coming to Christmas morning with the family. Charlotte is going to be absolutely beside herself with joy." "I wouldn't miss it," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who had finally found his place in the world. As James watched Marcus's car disappear into the December night, he felt a profound sense of completion. Princess Charlotte's innocent question had opened a door that had been closed for nearly 3 decades, and tonight, that door had finally swung wide enough for a family to walk through it together. The weight of the secret he had carried was finally lifting, replaced by the warmth of knowing that sometimes the most important security he could provide was helping people find their way back to each other. Christmas morning at Sandringham had never been more magical, and James Morrison had witnessed many royal Christmas celebrations during his years of service. But this year was different. This year the family gathering was complete in a way it had never been before, and the joy radiating from every member of the royal family was almost tangible. Princess Charlotte had woken before dawn, not unusual for an 8-year-old on Christmas morning, but her excitement this year had an extra dimension. She had been told that Uncle Marcus would be joining them for Christmas breakfast, and she had spent the previous evening rehearsing what she wanted to say to him and showing her grandmother the special drawing she had made for his arrival. James had arrived early to coordinate security for what would be Marcus's first official family gathering, but his role today felt more like ensuring a celebration than protecting against threats. The atmosphere in the house was one of anticipation and joy, with King Charles whistling Christmas carols as he helped arrange presents under the tree, and Queen Camilla humming to herself as she supervised the breakfast preparations. The doorbell rang at precisely 8 o'clock, and Charlotte's delighted shriek could be heard throughout the house. James opened the door to find Marcus standing on the threshold, his arms full of carefully wrapped presents and his face glowing with nervous excitement. "Uncle Marcus!" Charlotte's voice carried down the hallway, followed by the rapid sound of small feet running on polished floors. Marcus had barely stepped into the entrance hall when Charlotte launched herself at him with the uninhibited joy that only children possess. He caught her in a bear hug, spinning her around as she giggled with pure delight. "Charlotte," he said, setting her down and crouching to her level, "I've been waiting to meet you properly for such a long time." "Me too," she said solemnly, then broke into a grin. "I made you a drawing. It's a picture of our whole family, and I put you right next to Granny Camilla, because that's where you belong." James watched Marcus's expression transform as the simple wisdom of Charlotte's words hit him. Here was a child who had effortlessly solved what adults had treated as an impossibly complex problem for nearly 3 decades. "I have something for you too," Marcus said, pulling a small wrapped package from his pocket. I've been saving Christmas presents for you for 3 years. This one seemed the most special. Charlotte unwrapped the gift with the careful attention she gave to important things, revealing a delicate silver bracelet with small charms representing horses, books, and stars. It's beautiful, she breathed. Will you help me put it on? As Marcus fastened the bracelet around Charlotte's wrist, James noticed Camilla watching from the doorway with tears in her eyes. This simple interaction between uncle and niece represented everything she had dreamed of but never dared to hope for. "Where are George and Louis?" Marcus asked Charlotte as they walked toward the sitting room. "George is trying to convince Papa that he's old enough to help carve the turkey," Charlotte explained with the patient tone of a sister explaining her brother's hopeless cause. "And Louis is building a fort out of cushions because he says Christmas is better when you have a proper fortress to defend your presents." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying genuine delight. "He sounds like a strategic thinker. I like that in a nephew." The morning unfolded with the easy rhythm of a family celebration, but James could see the subtle moments that made this Christmas different from all the others. There was the way King Charles included Marcus in conversations about family traditions, explaining the history behind certain ornaments and customs. There was Camilla's obvious joy in finally being able to openly show affection for her son, touching his arm during conversations and including him in family photographs without the fear that had shadowed their relationship for so long. Most significantly, there was the effortless way Marcus fit into the family dynamic. He helped George with a complex Lego construction project, listened attentively to Louis's elaborate explanations of his cushion fort's defensive capabilities, and engaged in a serious discussion with Charlotte about her latest mathematical discoveries. "You know," Prince William said to James during a quiet moment when they were both observing the family interactions, "I was worried about how this change would affect the children's understanding of family structure. But look at them. They've accepted Marcus as if he's always been here." James nodded, watching as Marcus helped Charlotte arrange her new art supplies while simultaneously offering architectural advice to George's building project. Children seem to have an instinct for family that adults sometimes overcomplicate. Charlotte's question started all of this. William mused. "Sometimes I think children see solutions that we miss because they're not burdened by our assumption that things have to be complicated." The observation proved prophetic when, later in the morning, Louis made an announcement that stopped all conversation in the room. "Uncle Marcus," he said with the serious tone that 6-year-olds use for important declarations, "next year you should bring your own family for Christmas too. It's not fair if they have to spend Christmas without you just because you're spending it with us." The room fell silent as the adults processed the implications of Louis's innocent comment. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful, and James could see him working through something in his mind. "That's a very kind thought, Louis," Marcus said carefully. "What made you think about that?" "Well," Louis explained with perfect 6-year-old logic, "when Grandpa Charles married Granny Camilla, we got Tom and Laura's new family too. And when Mama married Papa, we got new grandparents and cousins. So if you're our family now, then your family should be our family too, shouldn't they?" James saw King Charles and Camilla exchange glances, both recognizing the wisdom in their grandson's observation. Marcus had mentioned his adoptive parents, Janet and Peter Thornton, several times during their previous conversations, always with warmth and respect. "The Thorntons raised me and loved me for 27 years, Marcus said slowly, looking around the room at the faces of his birth family. "They're my parents in every way that matters. Louis is right that it seems unfair to ask me to choose between families during holidays." "Then why should you choose?" Charlotte asked, with the directness that had started this entire journey. "Why can't we just have more family?" Queen Camilla spoke up from her position by the fireplace, her voice carrying the same resolve that had made her beloved by the public despite early controversy. "Marcus, would your parents be open to joining us for family occasions? I would very much like to meet and thank the people who raised my son with such love and wisdom." "I think," Marcus said slowly, a smile spreading across his face, "they would be absolutely delighted. Dad Peter has been joking for weeks about finally getting to see Sandringham from the inside, and Mum Janet keeps asking if she should curtsy or just offer to help with the washing up." "She should definitely offer to help with the washing up," Prince William said, with a grin. "That's what family does." The conversation continued throughout the morning, with plans forming organically for Easter celebrations that would include both sides of Marcus's family. Summer gatherings at Balmoral where the Thorntons could experience royal family traditions firsthand, and birthday parties where Marcus would finally be able to bridge the gap between his two families completely. James found himself documenting not just a security detail, but a masterclass in how families can evolve and grow when love is allowed to overcome fear. The easy acceptance of the children, the genuine warmth between adults, and the practical solutions to logistical challenges all pointed to a future where Marcus's dual family status would be seen as a blessing rather than a complication. As the day progressed, James noticed media vehicles gathering at the estate's perimeter, drawn by reports that there might be unusual activity at the royal Christmas celebration. He approached King Charles during a lull in the festivities. "Sir, there's increased media attention outside. Nothing concerning from a security standpoint, but they seem to be speculating about additional family members being present."
Charles nodded thoughtfully.
"I suppose we should expect this to become public knowledge sooner rather than later. Marcus, what are your thoughts about media attention?" Marcus, who had been teaching Charlotte a card game, looked up with a calm expression that impressed James. "I've been thinking about this possibility since our first dinner together. I'm prepared for media interest, and I have legal advice ready if needed. The truth is, I'm proud to be part of this family, and I'm tired of acting like it's something that needs to be hidden."
The palace press office could prepare a simple statement, James suggested.
"Something that acknowledges Marcus as Queen Camilla's son and your stepson without sensationalizing the story or inviting invasive speculation." "A normal family announcement," Camilla agreed. "Nothing dramatic, just the truth presented straightforwardly." Princess Charlotte, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention she gave to important matters, made her own contribution to the discussion. "Could we put in the announcement that Uncle Marcus is very good at explaining mathematics and building things? That way people will know he's useful family, not just secret family." The laughter that followed Charlotte's suggestion broke any remaining tension about media coverage. Here was a child who saw her uncle's value in completely practical terms, free from the complex considerations that had kept adults paralyzed by fear for decades. As the Christmas celebration continued into the evening, James found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. It had started with an overheard conversation in a castle corridor, grown through Princess Charlotte's innocent questions, and culminated in this moment of complete family integration. The secret that had once seemed too dangerous to reveal had transformed into a source of strength and joy for everyone involved. Marcus was no longer the hidden son living in shadows, but a beloved family member whose presence enriched every gathering. The Thorntons were soon to become part of the extended royal family circle, bridging two worlds with grace and humor. And the children, who had adapted to this change with remarkable ease, would grow up knowing that families can expand and evolve, and that love is always stronger than fear. Late that evening, as the family settled in for Christmas night movies and games, James received a text message from Marcus. "Thank you for making this possible. I never imagined that losing my secret would actually mean finding my family." Looking around the room at the scene of domestic happiness, James typed back, "Sometimes the best way to protect people is to help them stop hiding from each other." As he watched Princess Charlotte fall asleep with her head on her Uncle Marcus's shoulder while he quietly narrated the Christmas movie for her, James knew that this was what successful security work truly looked like. Not just protecting people from external threats, but helping them create the kind of bonds that made life worth protecting in the first place. The secret was finally free, and in its place was something far more valuable. A family that was complete at last, stronger for having found its way back to itself, and ready to face whatever challenges the future might bring with the unshakable foundation of love that had been waiting 27 years to be fully expressed. Outside, snow began to fall on Sandringham House, covering the estate in pristine white that seemed to symbolize the fresh start that Marcus's integration into the family represented. The media vehicles gradually departed as Christmas night settled over the Norfolk countryside, their drivers recognizing that whatever story they had hoped to find was simply a family celebrating the holiday together. And in the warm glow of the sitting room, as laughter and contentment filled the spaces where secrets had once lived, James Morrison completed what would be his final security report as the keeper of hidden truths. Tomorrow, he would return to the straightforward work of protecting a family whose greatest secret had become their greatest joy.